Great. Cool. Well, I guess we can get started. So I have a little announcement that my online course, it's called Mastering Glaze Consistency, registration opened yesterday. So if you want more information about that, I'm just gonna post a link in the chat that you could click for more details. Of course, I already sent you all an email about it yesterday, but just in case you missed that, I've been working really hard on this course for quite a few months now, so I'm pretty excited that it's ready to go. So I've had quite a few people join already. Hello from Yellowknife, woo! And Colorado and New Brunswick, excellent. Scotland. Oh, sorry, what was that? Andy?
And Australia.
And Australia, yes. Wonderful. Oh, and then I didn't send that message properly. I just sent it to Sarah somehow. So I'm just gonna resend the link to my course. Get that out of the way there. Now it should be there for everyone. Hello, St. Petersburg, Russia. Awesome. Okay, so since everyone that's on video, there's no like raise your hand option anymore, and there's no question and answer box like with the webinar. So if you want to get my attention, please wave your hand, and then I'll make sure to get you a chance to talk, because sometimes it's hard when we're talking like this, where it's just kind of one person at a time. So, and I will do my best to keep up with the chat. And would anyone like to start? I see Elizabeth Beverly. Yeah,
yep.
Go ahead.
Now, hi, Sue, and hi, Susan Smith in Victoria. I'm Elizabeth in Adelaide, so another Australian body here. I only just started making glazes, and I've just bought a Canadian kiln too, so it's interesting for me to make contact with you guys. I mixed up a Chun, the revised one, but it came out really powdery, and that's on the test. And I don't know, when I put it over the top of something else, it almost rubs right off, and I don't know when I glaze it, if it's supposed to come out shiny like that one, or matte like that, but when it came out, it hadn't done basically anything, so I don't know what I did that was incorrect. So
okay. So your fired piece came out dry, like not shiny?
Well, it didn't come out with any gloss.
Okay.
So is it supposed to be matte? Like that's an underglaze.
Okay.
But
and
sorry, I can't find the test for it. But when I put it on, it's really powdery. So should it be powdery before
yeah, so I have never used this glaze myself, but I remember someone posting about it in my Facebook group recently, and they said the same thing, that it was quite powdery, and that their results were really uneven, really streaky and uneven. And I remember the recipe doesn't have any clay in it, or not very much clay.
Well, it has ball clay, 28.85%.
Okay, I might be thinking of a different glaze. So what is this? It's called Chun?
Yeah, it's whiting, zinc oxide, soda feldspar, ball clay, silica, and copper carb.
Okay. So interesting. Because normally, so you say it has 28% ball clay?
Yes.
Okay. Because clay is one of the ingredients in a glaze recipe that actually hardens the glaze onto the test tile. And so I often see glazes before they go into the kiln are really powdery when they don't contain very much clay at all. So I'm just gonna look this glaze up on Glazy. Is it just called Chun, or is there?
It's Chun, and it had in brackets revised.
Okay.
I think it would be, yeah. You probably can't see that. That's my percentages down there. This is because I only made a small amount.
Okay, so yeah, I can see this. I just made the screen bigger. So whiting, zinc, soda, feldspar, ball clay, silica. So the percentages are on the left, and then the amounts are on the right.
Yeah, I only made a small amount.
Yeah. Okay. So it is. So it's 5.77% ball clay.
28. So no, 20. These are the percents. It's 28.
Right. So how did you get 28? Did you multiply 5.77 times?
Oh no, that's because I only made a small amount. That's what yeah, that's my maths probably. Yeah, but it should come out glossy or shiny. So should it come out like that?
Yeah. Has anyone used this glaze before? Because I haven't. And so I'm not sure, like most glazes should come out either shiny or matte, but they should be like, they should feel glassy, whether or not they're glossy. But they should feel like smooth like a glass and not rough and dry like clay, like fired clay. So did your glaze come out really dry? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. I have to. Okay. Anyway, I just thought someone else might have had a similar experience with their glaze, with that clay. So I wondered if it was my maths. Might be my maths.
What was the glaze?
It's called Chun.
Just Chun, right?
Yeah, like I've heard of seltzer Chun.
Yeah, that I have tried. Yes. Right. Can I see it again?
Can we look at the recipe again?
Sorry, I came a little later, so.
Hang on, I'll put it.
Let me see it.
Maybe that's.
It is a John Britt's recipe.
Well, yeah, it was. I thought I found it on Glazy, but maybe it wasn't.
Yeah, that's
I should record better, shouldn't I?
Well, a lot of John Britt's recipes are on Glazy because people just add whatever recipes they want.
Hold on. It's not on the main screen, so I'm not able to really read it.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, no.
Okay. Maybe I'll let someone else ask a question who's more prepared than I.
So just in the chat, so Lily, just to let you know that you're messaging me privately, but Lily says seafoam Chun is a little powdery after glazing. And did you use witness cones in your firing?
No, and it was done in my teacher's kiln. I haven't used my kiln yet. So
okay.
Just setting that up.
So normally when, if a glaze is under fired, then that's, or what am I trying to say? Normally when a glaze that's supposed to be glossy comes out matte or dry, as I was saying, then that would mean that the glaze is under fired, which you wouldn't know if you didn't put cones in the kiln, but you would probably be able to tell by all the other pots coming out of the kiln whether they looked like they were underfired or. But yeah, so I'm just having trouble searching on Glazy right now. Oh, here we go. So I'm gonna try to just see if I can pull up this recipe, because then I could just share the link. So there's seltzer chun, Pete's chun. Oh, there's lots of seafoam chun. Do you know, was it a seafoam chun?
It wasn't seafoam chun because it doesn't have any kaolin in it. There's no kaolin in this one. It's just, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it could be maybe you forgot one of the materials.
I ticked them off as they went in.
You
but
did, okay.
It might be my maths, Sue, more than anything, maybe.
That's possible. So maybe, go back and just like redo your calculations. And then
I'll have another go. Thank you. But it might be powdery. Yeah, it might be the amount of ball clay I put in or something, you think.
Well, yeah, so it's really common for glazes that have really low clay content to be powdery. And so like I would say under 10% clay in a glaze recipe, those glazes often turn out powdery. And one way that you can reduce that powderiness is to flocculate the glaze with Epsom salts. And what that does, like the powderiness is all the particles aren't really stuck to each other. And when you add a little bit of Epsom salts, so if you just have a little test, then I would just add a couple of drops, mix it really well. And what that does is it helps to bind all the materials together. And so that helps that it's not so powdery before it enters the kiln.
I did add some Epsom salts to it. And tested it specific gravity, and it was I don't know, 1.5 or something like that. So
okay, so yeah, it sounds like
I'm sorry I can't do the recipe into chat because I don't know where chat is. So maybe someone else ask a question. It's a long time. Thank you.
Okay.
If I find out how to do it, I'll put it on there. Thank you. Thank you very much, Sue.
No worries. There is a little, so if you want to open the chat, along the bottom, I don't know if you're on a laptop or a mobile device, but along the bottom, there's a little chat icon that you can click, and then that'll open up the chat on the right.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. So did anyone want to, have anything to add to that, or?
Hi, it's Sue from Warringal.
Yes.
Hi. I made the Chun seafoam glaze and it comes out glossy. I used the John Britt recipe out of his book. It's a beautiful glaze to use, but that just has feldspar, silica, kaolin, and zinc oxide in it. And then you just add your colorant.
Okay.
Can you see that? Oh, you might not be able to see it.
Yeah,
I see that.
Oh, that's lovely.
And then that's on a red clay. Sorry, just adjusting my picture. It's a bit darker than that on the red clay.
Okay, and did you say that's the seafoam?
That's a seafoam chun out of John Britt's book.
Okay. Yeah. So that might be a different recipe. I wonder if all these chun recipes are related, like there's just like one little, Emily, I see you waving your hand.
There's some different chun recipes there in his book.
Okay.
Yeah, there are. And this is one of his chun recipes. It's actually in his book. But there's a YouTube video, Jessica Putnam Phillips. I don't know how popular she is down in Australia, but up here she's pretty popular, and she has a how to mix glaze, I think is the exact, and she uses this chun recipe. This is on a buff stoneware, and it turned out I'm really, really new to this too. I mean, this is my first test tile ever. And it
Nice.
worked out really good for me. And so you might check out YouTube, Jessica Putnam Phillips. But I did have a question.
Yeah,
If that's okay.
absolutely.
So like I said, this is my very, very first set of test tiles. But I was trying to do the raspberry that's in the Ron Roy John Hasselbreath book, Mastering Cone 6 Glazes. That, by the way, for anybody who is brand new, is a little bit more basic than John Britt's book, and it felt a lot easier for me to use or to start off with. But I did the raspberry, and it says in there, you know, if you do the raspberry and you get too much tin, then you're going to end up with a green glaze. And I ended up with a green glaze. But, you know, so.
If you get too much what? Did you say, Julie? If you get too much what?
Okay, so I've also cross-referenced this with the John Britt book. So, like every red or pink glaze out there uses 7.5 of chrome and 0.2 of tin, or vice versa. I can't remember exactly
Vice
which one it
versa.
is.
Yeah.
It's vice versa? Okay,
Yeah.
so 7.5 of tin. And then 0.2 of the chrome. And they say if you get too much chrome, because you're supposed to put 0.2 in there, then you'll end up with an ugly green glaze. And it was not ugly. It was a very pretty green. But then my grandmother, she's a ceramicist, and she said she would never fire green and red glazes in the same firing. And I thought that's kind of random because everybody sees, I mean, you see red and green glazes together. So I'm not sure that's what's going on. I did use witness cones. I got to about a 5.5. I mean, the 6 was bending, but it wasn't. So I ordered some higher fire cones, but I was wondering if that might be what I'm dealing with is a firing temperature.
Okay. And so what was the issue coming out of the kiln? That it's green?
The issue is I'm trying to make red glaze and it's turning out green.
Okay. And what size of batch of glaze did you make?
I just made a really small batch, but I used a micron scale. So I had the 0.2 in there to the 100th of a gram. So
yeah. Okay. So, I mean, what I would do, because if it came out green and then the warning was that if you use too much chrome, it's going to come out green, then I would maybe assume maybe it needs a bit less chrome. Not saying that your scale is inaccurate, but what I would do is double the recipe, leave out the chrome, because then you'd be cutting the chrome in half, and then fire that and see if it goes more towards red or the raspberry color. Because yeah, chrome is one of those ones where like the teeniest amount too much will change the color. So
then what does chrome do? What's the purpose of chrome in a red glaze?
it's the colorant. It's what gives it the color.
Okay.
So yeah, and so you just need a very small amount of colorant, and so if you have too much colorant, then it's going to throw off the color. So that's what I would assume. I see Carol with her hand up. Have you tried this glaze before, Carol?
No, I haven't tried this glaze, but I have done with success. I made a batch of glaze and it didn't turn out. I ended up realizing that I'd put too much of something in. So I made another batch of it and I didn't put that ingredient in it. And then I mixed those 2 batches together and then it actually worked out to my benefit.
Yeah. So yeah, that's what I was suggesting was, yeah, make another batch the same size, leave out the chrome, mix the 2 together, which will half the chrome, and then yeah, it's worth that
Yeah,
would be
I
the
didn't
next
get that
test.
when you explained it a while ago. I get it now. So thanks for helping clarify.
Yeah,
that.
thanks, Carol. Jenny and Leslie, I see both your hands up. So
I was just going to say that the chrome and the tin are what makes the red, and if the proportion isn't right, then you're going to get green. So that's why it's confusing, because green, if you just put chrome in something, it's going to be green. It's a really powerful colorant. So that's all.
yes. And then Jenny, you had your hand up. Here, I'm going to unmute you. Oh, I think we did it at the same time. There we go. Oh. You're still muted. I'm trying to unmute you. There.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
We use this Ron Roy's raspberry in our guild. We've used it for a very, very long time. It's definitely a cone 6 glaze. It's matte and yucky at cone 5, and it's glossy and more translucent at cone 6. So it's definitely doesn't like that slightly lower firing. I don't know about the green, but I do know about, we've used this glaze for a long time.
Okay. That's some very good insight. Yeah, that the temperature could be affecting the result as
Okay,
well.
so for some reason, I could not see her talking. Can you just tell me the name of that glaze one more time?
This is the raspberry glaze, correct? Yeah.
Ron Roy.
Yeah. Ron Roy's raspberry glaze.
Okay, so Ron Roy's raspberry is matte at cone 5, but beautiful at cone 6. Okay, because that's what I'm using is the Hasselbrook Roy recipe. So that's very good to know. Thank you.
Yeah. Good one. Okay, I see Carol with your hand up. I just realized you can put your hand up like in the Zoom application. I'm not sure how you do that, but I see some people with their hands up. So I don't have the option to put my hand up. So that's another way you could get my attention, is just raising your hand. So yeah, so go ahead, Carol.
Yeah, just another little note that I'm hearing and thinking about is that maybe because it was such a small batch, even if your scale was really precise in your, like, what end of the 0.2 were you at, the high end or the low end, that might have actually made the difference in the coloring. And I was shown a trick by a potter, a local potter up here in Yukon, Patrick Royal, maybe Sue even knows him, and he would weigh, how would he do that? He would weigh his stuff on the paper. Oh, I can't remember. Sue, can you pipe in?
Yeah. So I think if you weigh out like 10 grams, and then you can kind of like weigh that out on a piece of paper, and then you can kind of cut it in half. So then you have 5 grams, and then you could cut that in half. Is that what you mean?
Well, just to get that precision. So because of the smallness of the batch, because that chromium might be that chrome might be so strong, and I don't know, I'm really new. I've made like 5 glazes in my life, so I'm totally new to this, but I try to watch videos and listen to people, which is why I'm on here. And I'm so scared to make my next batch of glaze because I've messed up. But anyways, because it's such a small amount, that if you're on the one side of the 100th or the 10th, then that'll make a difference in what your outcome. That's all I'm saying. And yeah, that's all.
Yeah. So if you could weigh out, so if you have a scale that's quite accurate to 1 gram, but it might be less accurate to 1/10 of a gram, then you could weigh out 1 gram, and then you could cut, divide that into 10 equal parts, and then that could be a way to get to those smaller increments. So yeah, that's something that I have learned about as well. So that's a good tip. Okay, so I see Stephen and then Andy with your hands up. So go ahead, Stephen.
This is probably a silly question. I tend to do things backwards. Specific gravity. When I was mixing my last sample batch, I got to thinking about, well, I'm going to do 100 grams per cup, and I want that target, that 1.5 specific gravity. So I just added 63 milliliters to each cup and then put the dry in. And I realize that's not absolutely true, because if there's any amount of bentonite or talc or several other minerals that just suck up the water, then all bets are off. Is that true? Am I hitting on a truth here?
Yeah, because all of our glaze materials, like the dry materials, have their own density. And so the lighter, fluffier materials have a lower density than the heavier materials. And so when you have a recipe, you're combining all these different materials with different densities. So that's why you can't just take a glaze and, attach, like say you want any glaze to be 1.5 specific gravity, you can't just attach a volume in milliliters, because every glaze is going to be a little bit different. So yeah, the any clay materials, they absorb water. So they kind of like suck the water into their structure and swell. So that's changing because specific gravity is the density of a liquid. So the density of a solid is measured in grams per cubic centimeter. Well, the density of a liquid is measured in grams per milliliter. So that's what we're measuring when we measure specific gravity. So yeah, you're very right in that the different materials will change how much water is required to get to a specific gravity number.
And number two, I've run a couple tests recently. I went ahead and loaded them on the website, and what I was getting frustrated over was mixes, and so the bases weren't coming out the way I wanted. So I ended up with the chemicals I have, and since the ceramic stores are closed, I was looking for recipes that would use what I had. And so I found 10 that varied from glossy to matte, and then also from transparent to opaque, and ran those 10, found 6 that looked useful, and then ran those with red, blue, green, iron, cobalt, and copper. And so I posted the results, and I've got a little matrix. So what I'm fine tuning now is application. So I haven't mixed anything over 100 grams. So I'm going to mix half a gallon of some of these, because I have larger pots, 10 by 10, that I didn't want to ruin with the glaze. So I'm feeling good enough about this last batch of glazes. I'm take the plunge now and put it on my 10-inch bowls. So we'll see.
Yeah. So just a word of advice is, when you've only ever done 100-gram tests, there's always a chance that when you make a larger batch that the glaze will come out differently. And that could be, so if you're measuring specific gravity, that's a really good step, because then you can make sure that your water content is proportionately equivalent in a larger batch. But just know that, like, depending on the accuracy of your scale, when you weigh out 100 grams, it's easy to be off by a gram or two. And then when you weigh out a larger amount, sometimes the results come out differently. So I would recommend, when you make your large batch, to also do a test, or to not glaze all your pots before just testing that large batch of glaze first.
Well, I sure am enjoying the website and the Zoom. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Dora, did you have something to add to that? Oh, sorry, you're just muted. There, I've unmuted you.
Hi, thank
Hi.
you, Sue.
You're
I
welcome.
just want to tell you how much I appreciate this whole thing that you're doing. But, you know, specific gravity seems to be such a critical part of any recipe along with firing. I'm surprised. I was looking at a lot of recipes and that information didn't seem to be included. Did I miss it? Am I not looking it right? Because it seems like if I give you a recipe, I'm a baker by trade, a master baker, okay? You need to know what the water content is going to be. In this case, in glazes, you need to know the specific gravity. In baking, you have to know the temperatures of doughs. You have to know a lot of things. And it just seems like I see all these recipes. I'm thinking, hey guys, what was the specific gravity? How did you fire this glaze? It just seems like information is not complete, I guess.
Yeah, and that just comes from, like, for one thing, specific gravity is kind of user preference because it depends on your application method. So your specific gravity, ideal specific gravity for a dipping glaze would be different than for a brushing glaze, would be different for spraying. And so, and then some people might like a glaze to be thinner because they're layering it with another glaze. So there isn't really a correct answer for specific gravity.
Okay.
But I would recommend, like, as people are, I find that not a lot of people were kind of brought up in their glaze knowledge knowing how to measure specific gravity. And I think that the more it becomes more common for people to do that, then they'll start including that in their recipes. But if that, you know, all the recipes that were published on Glazy, if the people who published them weren't actively measuring their specific gravity, then that wouldn't be something that they would include in their recipes. So that's why. But so it would be one thing. So if I were to publish a recipe that I use all the time, you know, I can let people know the specific gravity that I like to keep it at, but it's really just a suggestion.
Yeah, at least it gives you a starting place when you don't know about it. So I didn't even know about specific gravity, for instance.
Yeah, a lot of people don't, and I didn't learn it in school or anything either. So it's just something that I've come to learn just from troubleshooting and trying to kind of solve my own problems. Is this specific gravity has been really helpful for a lot of things. So. So hopefully that answers your question, Dora, as to why.
Yes.
But yeah, I do agree that it would be helpful if glazes were published with like a recommended specific gravity. But yeah, that's just something like if I'm testing a new glaze recipe, then I will tend to start with a high specific gravity and do a little dip a test tile and then bring the specific gravity down and dip another tile and kind of compare results and then just see where I fit. Like with what I prefer. Yeah, go ahead, Dora.
I'm sure you have a test kiln. I was wondering what type of test kiln you use. That's my next purchase.
Yeah, I have a little, so I have a little homemade test kiln that someone made in school years ago at, they went to Emily Carr in Vancouver and they made a little kiln. So it's, the inside dimensions are 8 inches by 8 inches by 6 inches tall. So it's tiny. And then I have another little Olympic test kiln that's a little bit bigger. It's probably, you know, this big. But it really struggles to reach cone 6. So if that little kiln, I fired to cone 10 in like 4 hours. It really heats up, like the number of elements per volume is really up there, so it heats up really fast. But my larger kiln just struggles to reach cone 6, so I don't use it as much. And Dora, yeah?
What I was wondering is how do the results in your test kiln compare to firing? Like I've got some scuts. How do they compare?
Yeah, so the issue with test kilns isn't necessarily the temperature that they get to, but it's the cooling rate. And so a teeny tiny kiln, it cools really, really fast. Whereas a large kiln, like we have cone art kilns at work, they're 12 cubic feet and the bricks are 2.5 inches thick. And so these kilns take well over 24 hours to cool. Whereas my little test kiln, it cools in a few hours. And so that cooling cycle, if you take a glaze and cool it in a couple of hours, and then you take the same glaze and cool it over, you know, a day or more, then your results can be quite varied because of the crystallization of the materials that happen during the cooling cycle. And titanium and rutile are the, like rutile is 90% titanium. So titanium is one of those ingredients that crystallizes during the cooling cycle. And so a lot of really popular glazes contain rutile. And so if you take a rutile or titanium glaze and you cool it really fast, you could have a glossy glaze, but then if you cool it really slowly, it could be completely matte and crystallized. And there's other, you know, other titanium glazes won't go matte, but like the color will change. Sometimes they're, the crystals are a different color than the glass that the crystals are growing in. So you can get completely different colors. So that's the thing about test kilns, is that unless you have a computerized test kiln where you can program a cooling cycle, which I don't, mine's just, it has one dial, there's no kiln sitter or anything, then I just have to kind of take those test results and know that they could be dramatically different if I put them into the larger kiln that takes longer to cool.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. So Andy, your hand has been up for a while, and
all right.
Hi.
I'm a raw beginner.
Yes.
And so many questions watching this morning. So first question, minimum batch size. What would you recommend as a minimum batch size of your glazes? And secondly, what's the difference between a brushing and a dipping glaze? At the moment, I'm using all brushing glazes.
Okay. Brushing glazes that you purchase or that you're making?
No, that I've purchased.
Okay. So minimum batch size, I mean, there isn't really a minimum. I like to make at least 200 grams at a time for if I'm making a test batch. Just because I find 100 grams, my results can be inaccurate just because of my scales. Like I don't have a super precise scale that will measure, you know, like 0.1, 0.2 grams. So I tend to measure, or I tend to make 200 gram test batches or more. And then what your other, a brushing and a dipping glaze. So brushing glazes often contain an ingredient that makes them more fluid and brushable. Because some glazes, if you try to brush them, as soon as the brush hits the bisque absorbs the water, sucks the water right out, and the glaze dries as soon as it comes in contact with the bisque. And so you need an ingredient in your glaze that will help it stay wet longer, and then also just to help it flow better. So the ingredient that a lot of the commercial companies are adding is called CMC gum, and that's an ingredient that you can buy in a powdered form, and you can mix it with water, and it creates like a gel it's like if any of you are painters as well, like it's like adding a brushing medium to your paint. So it just helps the glaze to be more fluid, where you can get a nice brush stroke before the glaze starts drying. And also so you can kind of layer the glaze without it, you know, you want the glaze to stay wet long enough, but not stay wet forever so that you can't apply another layer. So the commercial companies, you know, they've done lots of testing to kind of figure out the best conditions for their glazes. And I haven't personally done a lot of brushing myself, although we make brushing glazes for our kids' classes. And so I tend to, if I have a glaze that I want to brush, if I don't have the CMC gum, I find that flocculating the glaze will help it to stay wet longer. So if you have a glaze that dries as soon as the brush hits the bisque, then flocculating your glaze by adding a couple drops of a saturated Epsom salt solution, that will help the glaze to stay wet a little bit longer. And then also brushing glazes probably have a little less water in them than a dipping glaze, because they don't need to be super fluid, you know, where you're submerging a whole pot into the glaze. So they can be a little bit on the thicker side. So those are the main differences that I could think of without having tons of experience with brushing myself. I see Dora with your hand up.
I forgot. I forgot to ask you the second part of my question. I have to buy distilled water to bake here because we have so much iron and other hard stuff in our well water on the farm. And I was wondering how much of a difference water makes. And I'm thinking that iron in the water would affect a glaze.
Again, I don't have that experience with that kind of water, and I've had this question quite a few times, and I've heard that water can affect the way glazes turn out, and then I've also heard that it doesn't, and so I think it really depends where you are. Okay. I would love to see someone make the same glaze with distilled water and with really hard water, like exact same batch size and everything, and compare the results, because I would love to know for sure, because it seems to me that the water would just have really trace amounts of, you know, of iron and whatever else is in the hard water, but I could be wrong. It could be enough.
Yeah, no, there's people down the road that in 3 days they clean the toilets and tubs. In 3 days they'll have orange coming through. And then there was the thought too about if you have a water softener that's got salt added to it, is that going to affect the glaze? Is that going to affect clay if you're making your own clay? I'm thinking of all this stuff, and I'm thinking, I think it's going to require some testing, like you said.
Yeah, so please, if you do that test, I would love to see it.
As soon as I get an electrician here to hook up my kilns, I will be running more tests, yeah.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, thank you for that. Okay, Andy, I'm hoping I answered his question. And then I see Sue, is your hand up from before, or is your hand up now?
Yeah, it's been up for a while, that's fine.
Okay.
It was back to actually Elizabeth's comment or question about her Ron Roy's raspberry glaze. I was doing it wasn't Ron Roy, but it was a Glazy recipe. It was Pete's Cranberry. So it didn't have chrome in it. It had tin oxide and copper carbonate in it, and I've had so many different results with that one. Sometimes it comes up pink, like a nice deep rich pink, and sometimes it comes up virtually clear with a tiny tinge of green in it. The original recipe was using, I guess, American ingredients, and we're using Australian ingredients, and I figured that maybe our Australian ingredients might make a change there. But it's just been all over the place. Anyway, there was hardly any left in my bucket when I just did another test just recently, and it had hadn't dried out completely, but it had become very, very thick. So I added water. I didn't measure the specific gravity. Fired it again, and yeah, it was almost like a clear glaze again, and I'm almost to the point of giving up on it.
Okay.
It has a very high potash feldspar, 73.8 in it, So yeah, just don't know whether to continue with it or just be more careful with a specific gravity.
Right. So you're getting, it's a cranberry glaze, did you say?
Yeah, it's called Pete's Cranberry. It's on Glazy. It's 22291.
Okay. I'm just gonna look it up so I can just see the recipe, but off the top of my head, I'm wondering if, oh, I'm having troubles. Just a second. Pete's Cranberry. So you say it has 73% potash feldspar. What are the other ingredients? I can't seem to get this search to work.
So potash feldspar 73.8, whiting 11.1, Gersley borate 10.2, silica 4.9, tin oxide 1, copper carbonate 0.3.
Okay, interesting. So 0.3 copper carbonate. So that's a really small amount of colorant. So I wouldn't expect a lot of color, but the thing that pops into my mind first, so there's no clay in this recipe, is that correct? There's no kaolin, ball clay, EPK. No. And do you find that the glaze settles, like where when you come back, there's like a thick layer of water on top, and then all the materials have settled?
It was quite a small batch. Once again, small batch, and I was a bit hesitant to make a big batch with it being so variable. And the first, well, actually on Glazy it was listed as a cone 10, and my first firing was a cone 10, and it virtually ran off the pot. It was so runny.
Okay.
It looked like it was overfired. So I actually used the same recipe and put it in my cone 6. And I've had variable results with the cone 6. I've had good results and I've had poor results. So yeah.
And when you have good results, can you describe what it looks like?
So the best color was at the top of my kiln, the hottest part of the kiln at cone 6. And it was milky pink. Milky pink on the bottom shelf when it was on the bottom shelf, and it was where it was a bit thinner application. It was a nice pink. So when I say pink, sort of raspberry pink rather than pretty pink.
And this isn't a reduction glaze, is it? This is electric kiln.
These were in reduction. These ones were done in reduction.
Okay, so that makes sense. I'm trying to I'm trying to connect copper carbonate with this pink color that you're describing. So yes, if it's in reduction. So the thing about reduction firings is that they can be, because we fire a gas kiln every 2 months where I work, and we get quite varied results throughout the kiln. So in any given firing, the same glaze, like depending what shelf it's on, can come out completely different. And so this glaze, this raspberry glaze, in reduction, when it's being completely reduced, that copper is going to turn this bright red color. But if you had a pocket of your kiln where the reduction wasn't quite as heavy, or where it oxidized, then you could be anywhere between like a light turquoise and a pink color. So it could be just the variation of a reduction firing that's giving you different results. And then the other thing is that because this glaze doesn't have any clay in it, it has a little bit of Gillespie borate or Gersley borate. So that's an ingredient that does help to keep the other materials in suspension, But if your materials, if there's not enough clay or enough of a suspending material, then your glaze ingredients are going to start settling really fast. And so you need to mix really, really well, like before every dip. I would maybe recommend adding 1% bentonite to this recipe.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Because that'll make sure, help to make sure that everything's staying in suspension. Because, and then the other thing is that copper carbonate, sometimes the copper will settle out. And so if the copper is kind of sinking to the bottom of the bucket and you're dipping your test tile, maybe you're not getting the right proportion of copper on your tests. Those are things that I'm thinking about.
Yeah, that all makes sense. Yeah. Mm.
I would try again and just make maybe a bit
A bigger
larger.
batch.
A bit larger, yeah. You don't have to make too much just in case you can't get it to work, but I would keep working on it because it sounds like it has potential.
Yeah, it does. When it works, it's lovely.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I love the copper red recipes. They're some of my favorites.
Yeah, thank you for that. I can't seem to mute myself. Oh, here we go. My screen froze there for a while and I couldn't do anything, but I can mute myself again now. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, Kay.
Okay, so I'm just looking. Stephen, oh, Kay, I see your hand up. Yeah, go ahead.
Hello, I'm from Australia too, Victoria, and I've been making and firing for a long time, 35 years, and I've made a discovery that I have a large gas kiln and a small electric kiln. Sometimes this glaze, I don't know if you can see, this sort of earthy glaze that I really like, can come out a little bit too shiny and a little bit too grey in my large gas kiln because it's getting too much reduction, I think. If I refire that in my small gas kiln to around about 1120, it mats out and goes into these beautiful colours that I have here.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm assuming that's crystallization because of the fast cooling.
Right.
Do you think so? Yeah.
Yeah, so it comes out shiny in what? What's the difference between the two?
It comes out, it sometimes, in certain pockets of my gas kiln, I have a very large gas kiln, comes out grey and shiny. It's not a bad glaze, but it's not exactly my fave.
Yeah.
But if I refire it in the small electric kiln to about 1120 centigrade, it remats and re-oranges, if you know what I mean.
Okay, so you're going from a gas reduction firing into an oxidation electric.
Yeah. It was just one of those things that I tried out to see what would happen.
Yeah, and then to a lower temperature as well.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah,
not
so
all of my work. Yeah.
But this particular glaze, is that a Shino glaze?
It is. It's an oxidation Shino, but in my gas kiln, I tend to oxidize. Yeah. I don't do reduction firing deliberately, but like you were saying before, I have small pockets. So sometimes I'm not happy with a few pieces, and I can refire them in the electric kiln. I just thought it might be interesting for people to know that all of, is not always lost. You can sometimes find ways to refire.
Yeah, and so is that a lower temperature in the second fire?
In the gas kiln they go to 1280 centigrade.
Okay.
In the electric kiln they only go to 1120. So that really surprised me because that glaze would not be molten. However, it makes a marked difference to the glaze.
Although it may start melting by that point,
Yes.
right? So it might not be completely melted, but
Yeah.
some of it could start melting, and then the reaction is happening. Like, so my example that's kind of similar to this is we have, we fired a cone 6 in electric, and then some people add decals to their work, and then we put them back into our bisque firing.
Yes.
And so those, some of the glazes, when they come out of the bisque firing, which is a much lower temperature, I mean, you're going from like cone 10 to cone 6,
yes,
or thereabouts, and then we're going from cone 6 to cone 06. So it's a much lower temperature, but some of the glazes come out more matte in the second firing. And so I think it's just, the crystallization, like some of, the glaze is partially melted, and then it's those parts that start melting first that the crystallization must be happening, because it wouldn't be happening unless the glaze was starting to melt at least.
Yeah, that's very interesting.
No, that is interesting. So you're going from a large kiln to a small kiln as well, so that would kind of have a different cooling cycle, although the small kiln would be cooling a bit faster.
Sure.
But still, just refiring, often glazes can change, just going back to the same temperature. They can come out looking quite different. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. I'll just be 1 second. It's really warm in my office at this time of day, so I just had to open the door. Okay, I'm just looking at the chat. I haven't been keeping up with the chat. I see a message from Carol. What would you recommend for a clear glaze that's not staying in suspension? Still bentonite? Yes. If a glaze isn't staying in suspension and it doesn't already contain bentonite, I definitely recommend adding 1 to 2% bentonite, depending on how much clay is already in that glaze recipe. So I would say, like, if a glaze recipe had less than 10% clay, so clay being kaolin, ball clay, or anything with clay, gros leg is clay, then I would add, so if it has, what was I saying? I would say if it has less than 5%, to add 2% bentonite. And if it has any more than 5%, then just to add 1. Go ahead, Carol.
Yeah, what if you got that particular glaze from already pre-mixed powdered form and you don't know the recipe?
Okay, so if you don't know the recipe, then it's perfectly safe to add bentonite. I would start with 1%, and just add it while the glaze is dry before you add water. Is it a dry commercial powdered glaze that you're talking about?
Yeah, it was one of the first glazes I ever had in my studio, and I thought, oh geez, it'll be easy, I'll just get a clear glaze and then I'll start mixing glazes, and at least but it hard pans so badly that I almost struck, it's hard to mix the bloody thing, excuse my language, but but it's, I'd still like to have a clear glaze. I don't really want to make one if I have one, and just adding, so I don't know the materials in there, of course, and how much, but starting with the bentonite, it's wet. I guess the answer is easy. It's wet. It's already wet.
Okay, but do you know was it a glaze that you added water to?
Yes, I added the water to it.
And do you know how, did you weigh the glaze before you added the water?
No, it was recommended a certain amount of water to start off with, and then add a little bit more if it was a certain consistency. That it did not say anything about specific gravity, and I did not test it for specific gravity.
But did you buy the glaze in a bag and dump the whole thing in?
Yeah, I had it in a Ziploc bag. It even came in a Ziploc bag, and I just put a little hole in there and put my water in there, and then mixed it up, closed, and then, you know. Yeah. So that's kind of how I mixed that one.
So do you think like would you happen to know if it was 1 kilogram of glaze or?
Yeah, that's what it was. Yeah.
Oh, you do? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So even though it's wet now, you can, so if it was 1 kilogram of glaze, then you would add 10 grams of bentonite. That would be 1%. And so you can add 10 grams of bentonite to your wet glaze. I wrote an article about how to add bentonite to a wet glaze that I recommend reading before you do that, because if you just dump bentonite into a glaze and start mixing right away, it clumps up and becomes really hard to incorporate into the glaze. But I had a trick where if your glaze is settled, which most glazes that need bentonite have settled out so the water's on top. So take that 10 grams of bentonite, sprinkle it on top of the water, and then just let it sit. And then the bentonite will slake down. So don't touch it, just let it, and it'll kind of bubble, and the bentonite will be on the surface of the water, and then it'll just kind of sink. And once it stops, like there's no more bubbles or movement, then it's safe to stir the glaze. But it just needs to slake down. It's like adding water to dry clay. You just need to give it some time to slake down, and then it becomes nice and fluid and you can mix it in.
What a great tip. Thank you.
Yeah, and then just make sure that you use a high-speed mixer when you mix it in. And it wouldn't hurt to maybe sieve the glaze as well, just to make sure that there aren't any clumps in it. Yeah.
So a high-speed mixer, I've been using those plungers. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
Okay.
Like a hand blender, immersion blender. Yeah. Yeah, those are good.
And what about for mixing your clay when you're reclaiming and it's got lots, like, to make it all without lumps? Like, is that sufficient for mixing your clay, or do you need something a little more skookum for that?
Well, if it's a very small amount of clay, like, you know, like a small bucket, then I would use a hand blender. But I tend to, I don't recycle my clay until there's a big bucket full, usually. And so I have a drill with a paint mixing attachment, and that's what I use. For larger. Yeah, so the hand blenders are really effective for small batches, like just anything that it can fit in where you can reach the bottom of the bucket with the hand blender, then that's good. But yeah, anything larger, I would use a paint mixing attachment.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, someone, Funda. I see your hand up, and maybe you can let me know if I said your name right.
Yeah. I am I'm now connecting you from Holland, and well, it's 2 o'clock here in the night.
Okay.
And I have several questions about glazing and casting clay, because I do production sometimes, and I do more plaster works, and I've been studying ceramics. It's already 10 years. I did a lot of glazing tryouts. I failed many times, so that's very like it's a very regular thing. So what I have now, I'm making glazes, but look, the thing is, with the glazes, it doesn't matter how the expansion and all these rates are like accurate and everything. Sometimes I'm having some troubles with the casting clay, and my clay body is not matching to the glaze that I'm making. So there are also sometimes what I come across with, I do some tryouts and I don't have any problems, and with the test styles, and after a while, if I apply to these products, I can get tiny cracks and everything. So that is actually not not something that I can sell it as a tableware or asset, etc. Whatever. So, so what do you think I should be doing, and can I actually change the property of clay, casting clay I'm using? That's one thing I would like to know. And where do you actually really look at, like expansion, how low you can really go?
Okay. So I don't have experience with casting and clay, you know, the expansion of clay bodies. So I'm not sure what you could add to your clay body. Do you mix it from scratch, or do you buy like a powdered clay?
I sometimes even make my own clay.
Yeah.
But you know, there are times that you can make some soft, like porcelain, and you like some, to a certain point this clay would just fall apart. But if you get to the point that you actually really fire at certain temperature, then you can actually how do you say, like you can actually really hold it, and you can put glaze on it. And I also tried doing this and playing with glass on top of it. So it was really some kind of experiment. Like, if it is glass and if it is silica, you can just pour it on some under fire porcelain, and you can get a chunk of glass piece, you know. And that's kind of idea. But what do you think about glycerin? I heard that some people use glycerin in the glaze.
Glycerin.
Yeah, what is this?
Okay, I haven't actually heard of using glycerin in the glaze. Are they using it for application to
Yeah, they told me that it gives some like visual difference in the pigments and etc., and maybe in oxides, but I still didn't try, and I really don't know how to apply. That's why I thought, okay, maybe this is something I should ask you all.
Yeah.
If anybody has experience. And yeah, the thing is, I am pretty much of like doing casting works. That's why every time I need to really adjust my glaze to it. So this is my question. But yeah, tell me if you have any experience. Just go ahead.
Yeah, does anyone in here have experience with glycerin? It's just not, yeah, it's not something that I've heard of. Ben, do you have experience with glycerin? You're muted. There we go.
With glycerin. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. There's a product, you can get it over at Michael's Crafts and other craft stores. It's called Deco Art. And a technician turned me on to it. One of the big ceramic artists, his name was John Mason. He would add that into all of his glazes, and it would make it very hard. It's like an acrylic medium.
Yeah.
And so I'm about to start doing that because I'm traveling all the time with my pottery back and forth in order to get it fired. And so I don't have any room to keep my glazes where I get the pieces fired. So I have to have something durable enough to be able to pack into boxes and take over. So I'm hoping that I've played around with it a little bit. I've also added white's glue to certain glazes. And if they're a soda spar based, it'll turn into a gooey muck. But if any glazes that don't have it, and it's easy, you just add a little bit, and if it turns into snot, then you're not going to be able to use it in that glaze. But if it's a non-soda feldspar-based glaze, then you can add it in, and it paints on just like house paint. It goes on so smooth and glossy. I've done it with a number of Cone 10 glazes, and when I'm doing repair work, and just painting designs on, and it's amazing.
Okay. That's called Deco Art?
Deco Art. And I bought a gallon of it. I've been experimenting with it. It definitely makes your glaze harder and not so flaky. But you could probably add any medium you want. I just went out and bought flaxseed oil, linseed oil. I mean, these are all things that painters have used for, 1,000 years.
Yeah.
And there's no reason why you can't add that to your dry glaze base and have it completely different. You know, a different consistency. I think everything would paint onto bisqueware much more smoothly.
Yeah.
I think glycerin is going to add a whole new different quality. Sugar is going to add a quality. Anything that's going to go in as a medium, but you got to be careful. Some of that's going to rot after a while.
Yeah,
right.
and
Because it's a perfect medium for bacteria.
Yeah, also good for your
So,
skin.
other than that, you were talking about, but you were also talking about slip casting, and I do slip casting at all different glazes.
Oh.
Cone 10 and cone 5.
And how do you really like fix these crazing issues? Because I am really having a lot of trouble with that.
Well, crazing is always going to happen when your clay body doesn't match your glazes. That's why people like Peter Pincus, they buy commercial slips so that because they're already completely mixed up and they don't have to deal with that. You can also, when you're buying all the commercial Amico glazes, they have all been formulated to pretty much match one single clay body or a very small range. Because these guys have been playing with those formulas for 50 years.
Okay.
So I think that they've really got it down. And what I usually hear people doing is they're not trying to adjust their clay body to fit their glazes. They're adjusting all of their glazes to fit their clay bodies.
Okay.
Yeah.
And do you maybe ever, is there anyone use Mont Blanc porcelain? It's a very pure white porcelain. Okay.
Yes, we do.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, well, I'm just near the Netherlands, so I'm in Belgium. So we use the same kind of clay and porcelain. So, but I think that's the best choice.
Yeah, I love it. Here, I don't know if I can share a photo, but I would love it because I have one glaze that I use it on that clay body. I love it, but I really cannot change the expansion, and it just crazes insanely and sometimes even breaks the whole piece.
Do you have the recipe for that glaze?
Yes. That is actually, let me see. If you can go to glazy.com, it is old forge strontium.
Okay, Old Forge strontium. Okay, I see it.
And you can also see my photos of my tryouts.
Okay, these are your photos here?
Glazy? Just right under the, like there are 3 different, I guess. Let me see.
So are you talking about the clay or the glaze pulling away from the clay body?
No, it breaks the body. Yeah. Old Forge strontium gloss.
Okay.
And the last 4 image are from mine.
On Glazy.
I think I can maybe drop a photo here, if you can see.
Okay, yeah, I see that. Just 1 second. I'm just gonna have a look at this photo. And Dora, I did see your hand was up, so just
That's okay.
give us
I'll wait.
1 second.
Sure.
Okay, yeah. So I see your photo. And this is the glaze, this is the Old Forge glaze funda that you're talking about with the crazing?
Let me see. Yeah, and this is on Mont Blanc, and in any other clay it just behaves okay, but apparently with porcelain and one other casting clay I cannot really solve this issue.
Yeah, so crazing is really common with porcelain. So you can have the same glaze that doesn't craze on any stonewares, and then you put it on porcelain, and then it starts crazing. So it's just generally much harder to fit a glaze to a porcelain clay body. So so it's not surprising that you're having troubles. The photo that you sent is nice. Is that I can't really see what the issue is. Is it just the crazing that you're showing me?
Well, this is the glaze, but just on the about the corner, you can see there's a very big craze.
Okay. Yes. Okay. Yeah, I can sort of see that. Yeah. So let me just look at this, the recipe again. But yeah, it could just be that the glaze recipe needs to be adjusted. So what I'm seeing, are you familiar with the Unity molecular formula at all?
Yeah, I am also using digital fire inside live and stuff, yeah.
Okay, so in this particular glaze, I might increase the strontium, which would decrease the amount of sodium and potassium. So the strontium and calcium are the RO fluxes. Those are the secondary fluxes. And then the sodium and potassium are the R2O fluxes. So those are the primary fluxes. So if you, in the UMF, the fluxes always add up to 1. So when you increase one, the other one goes down. So if you were to increase the strontium, then that would bring down the sodium and calcium proportionately. But then you also want to make sure that you know, your silica and alumina levels stay about the same, or you might get some running.
Yeah.
So that could be something to play around with, where you just increase the strontium. So you would be bringing your flux ratio, which right now is at 0.3 to 0.7. So if you brought your flux ratio to closer to about 0.2 to 0.8, that is one way to reduce thermal expansion and to fix crazing issues.
Yeah.
So that's probably where I would start. If that makes sense to you?
Great.
Yeah.
Thanks.
You're welcome. Yes, Dora, I see you down there.
I was remembering as I taught oil painting, I used to tell my students these additive oils will extend drying time, you know, a long time, sometimes 3 weeks for a painting to dry, to touch. I was wondering if that affected the glazes in any such way. To the gentleman that's experimenting with the glycerin, I guess the question is directed.
To Ben. Oh, I muted you. Sorry, I was muting everyone because of the background noise.
Anyway, I haven't begun working with the oils yet, but you got to remember that bisqueware is dry and it's porous, and it's going to soak everything up. I think oils will move into it just as easily as fabric. So I think your glaze is going to firm up very quickly. And obviously, it doesn't hurt to put it out in the sun. But things like glycerin, I would see that drying and almost crystallizing like sugar very quickly, because those are all just water-based.
Okay, thank you.
That makes sense. That's cool. I'm glad you brought that up. It's neat to just like hear the different things that people do and try and experiment with. And yeah, I learned a few things today, so thank you.
Sure.
Okay. So I see Andy and Stephen have your hands up. Are those from before, or did you have another question? Because I can lower your hands. If you don't have another question, I'm just going to lower your hand. So yeah, does anyone else have a question for us right now? I'm looking around. I see Kay.
This is Kevin.
Oh, hi, Kevin. Okay, Kate, I'll come back to you. Hi, Kevin. Go ahead.
I had sent you an email, and I think I got it in the text, my question, but it's once you have your ideal specific gravity and flocculation for a specific glaze, then I've got a series of 4 questions. Would you mind running through that?
Oh, yeah, I do. I remember your email, so thank you for bringing that up. Yeah,
Thanks.
I see. Okay, so your question is, once you have an ideal specific gravity for a given glaze, does the specific gravity change for the ideal glaze that has been created? Does it change after flocculation? So no, specific gravity doesn't change with flocculation. So specific gravity only takes into account the solid particles, the ratio of solid particles to water. So if you don't adjust your water content, you aren't adjusting the specific gravity. So when you flocculate the glaze, all you're doing is changing the charge of the particles and the way that they interact with each other. So when you flocculate a glaze, you change the clay particles so that they start to attract each other rather than repel each other, and that helps the glaze materials to all stick together, stick to each other, stick to the bisque. So you're just kind of changing the way the particles interact in the glaze, but you're not changing the specific gravity. Next question is, does flocculation go away over time with this ideal glaze batch, or is it once and done? I have found that I'm pretty sure that it sticks around. It's hard to say because the glazes that I'm using, like the glazes that I manage at the studio where I work, they get used so much and we're constantly replenishing them like almost monthly. And so by the time, you know, there's any change, so much of that glaze has been used that any changes I would, you know, the water evaporates or people don't mix the glaze very well. And so more water gets pulled out of the glaze when people are glazing. So it's common for the specific gravity to go up and down, but I haven't found that with an existing glaze that's already been flocculated, if I'm adjusting the specific gravity, so say water has evaporated, so then I'm adding water back into the glaze, that I haven't had to re-flocculate. It's just adjusting the water content. So if I'm mixing more glaze to add to that batch, then generally I will need to flocculate it again. But I haven't actually tried, you know, flocculating a glaze and then just putting it aside where it's not being used on a daily basis to see if the flocculation goes away. But my inkling is that it doesn't.
That's what I needed.
That's what you needed. Okay.
Yep. Thank you.
Yeah. So it's just a guess. It's not something that I've specifically tested, but that's my understanding is that once it's flocculated, then those particles are attracting each other. Yeah. And then your last question was, what if you need to add some water in a few months due to evaporation? Right. Yeah. Just use the same specific gravity again. So yeah, once the glaze evaporates, you just measure specific gravity again. Generally, it has gone up, so you need to add water to bring it back down.
Perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome. Nice to talk to you. Okay. And then Kay had a question or a comment. Oh, sorry. I'm just, okay, we can hear you now.
All right. Not exactly a question, but just a sort of a little chat statement discussion thing.
Yeah.
I think when you're starting out glazing and decorating pieces, you often follow the rules. So we're told certain things and you use this way and that's the way we do it. But sometimes it's interesting to try things different ways.
Yes.
So sometimes even things like underglazes, you assume you put the underglaze on, then you put the glaze over the top. You can actually put underglazes over top of glazes. You can scratch them back. You can paint over top of them. You can use underglazes in conjunction with oxides. And I just wanted to show you, I don't know how well you can see that, but those pieces are all applied to the surface of a glaze before it's fired, not put underneath. And there's nothing wrong with putting them underneath, but it's just that you'll get a different result.
Right. So you're applying underglaze over top of a glaze?
Yes.
And then are you carving it back?
I'm scratching it through like a sgraffito.
Sgraffito. Yeah.
And also, doing all kinds of interesting things with glazes. So what I'm saying, I guess, is it's really good to be experimental, try different things on small pots that don't really matter too much, so that you're not disappointed if you spoil something really good. But the more you do that, the more you'll learn, I think.
Yeah, 100%. I agree.
Yeah. And that goes for glazed recipes too, like altering them a little bit and putting one dodgy pot in with a whole lot of good pots that you put in with a slightly changed glaze, and you might get something really interesting, or it might be terrible and you throw it out, but it doesn't really matter. Keep trying new things. And I've been doing it for a long time and I still make a lot of mistakes.
Yeah.
But it's an evolving thing. You never get there. You just keep getting there.
That's so true.
Yeah. But you're quite young, Sue, so you probably. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And in my course, one of the first assignments is to make a whole bunch of test tiles and some dodgy pots that you don't mind experimenting with. I don't call them dodgy pots, but I love that. But yeah, just have a handful. Like, the idea is that you just have all these different shapes that you can play around with, that you're not invested in the outcome, so that you can try new things, and that if you are disappointed with the results, that it's not a big deal, that it's not something that you poured your heart and soul into and then you ruined by, doing some glaze experiments with. So, yeah,
of course, the most important thing in all of that is knowing what you've done.
Yes.
So writing it down.
Yeah. Yes, that is true.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. And I love how you're adding underglaze on top of glaze and doing like sgraffito techniques over top of a glaze. I haven't actually heard of that. And so
just depends on what sort of glaze you're using too.
Sure.
It may not work on every single glaze.
Yeah.
But this is that oxidation Chino glaze that I talked about before. And it's quite versatile. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, Chino glazes often have really high clay content, and when glazes have high clay content, then they behave like clay, and so you can carve into them, and they're not going to just fall apart or flake off or anything. They have some substance to them, so that's great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. So just if anyone has anything to add, please. Sue, I see Sue with your hand up.
Hi Sue. Look, I've got about 25 kilograms of this box of white material, and I've been trying to work out what it is, and I've sort of narrowed it down. I think it might be nephsinite. So I've substituted it into one of the clear glazes that had a high proportion. Well, had 38 nephsinite, so I took that out and put this mystery substance in, and it the result when it was fired was virtually the same, but it actually had a different hand feel when I was mixing the glaze up.
Okay.
But it just sort of felt a bit grittier, that's all. But it looked very similar. So can I sort of assume that it's Neph cyanide, just a different batch, or because I don't really want to send it away for testing, or is there some other way to test? Like, can I just mix it up with water and put it in the kiln and test it that way? Is there some other way of looking at it?
Yeah, I mean, so do you have some nephsi that you know is nephsi?
Oh yes, definitely.
Yeah. So that could be something that you do. Although I like what you did where you took a recipe and just substituted the nephsi for this mystery material. And if the results, so you said it felt differently, like in the raw form in the bucket.
Yeah,
but
just slightly.
Yeah.
It just had a slightly rougher feel about it.
Okay.
But
yeah, but the fired results are the same.
Yeah.
Yeah. You could do that test where you just mix it with a little bit of water and just create like a little button on something that isn't going to run, because it could run. So you could test nephsi that you know is nephsi, and then this other material, and you could test other materials that you have that way just to kind of see what happens. But that would be a good way if they turn out the same. Just to narrow it down, because I mean, there's a good chance that, what was the percentage, do you remember, of nephsi in the recipe that you tested?
Yeah, 38.
Okay, so that's quite a lot.
Quite high. Yeah.
So I mean, it would be safe to assume, but you wouldn't know for sure 100%.
For sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I would maybe try testing another recipe that you are familiar with that contains nephsi, just to verify that before you start. Did someone give this to you?
Yeah.
Mystery?
Retired potter.
Okay. Yeah.
Buckets of stuff, and this came in a box, and the label had disintegrated, and so I've got boxes of talc and stuff like that. So
okay,
at least the talc still had the name on it.
Yeah, I know. I think that's really common for retired potters to be passing down all their old materials, and if they haven't used them for quite some time, the labels fall off or they fade, and it can be tricky to figure out what they are. But
Absolutely.
I think you intuitively came up with a good solution for that. If anyone else has a suggestion, I've never actually had to verify the identity of a material, so it's kind of the first time I've really thought about this.
All right. Okay.
So if
Someone's writing comments there, so I'll just have a look at the comments.
Yeah, Ben says, I think nephsi is a glass former all by itself. I use it in my raku glazes, and those formulas are only 4 different materials. Yeah, I mean, nephsi is a flux and a glass former. So it contains sodium, potassium, silica, and alumina. And so nephsi, it's kind of like a feldspar, although it has less silica and alumina and more flux proportionately. So it melts at a lower temperature than like a soda feldspar or a potassium feldspar. But yeah, so nephsi would turn into a glass all by itself because of the silica and alumina.
Oh, good. That's good to know. Good. What temperature would it melt at, though? Say if I'm doing a cone 6 firing, would it melt at a cone 6 temperature, or would I have to go higher?
Where I would look for that information would be Digital Fire website. So he does a lot of these material melting tests. So that would be the first place that I would check. I could almost guarantee that he has that information on there.
Great, thank you.
The temperature. You're welcome.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's we have 20 more minutes. So yeah, time for more questions, comments, anything that people want to chat about. I am all ears. I'm just reading the comments here. Much lower, around 1800 or 1900 degrees. That's the temperature that Nefsai melts at.
Great,
That's what
thank you.
Ben's saying. So
Right.
yeah, so that would be completely melted at cone 6, like even at bisque temperature. So you could try first firing it in the bisque to see how melted it gets. And if it's still powdery at bisque temperatures, then you could stick it in the glaze firing.
Great, terrific, great idea. I will try that out.
Okay.
I like all this practicing and testing.
Yes, me too.
Exciting.
Okay. So, Carol says, could the grainy part be that it may not be as fine as the one you know? Yeah, yeah, a different, definitely like a different batch. The mesh size could be different, so it could be like a coarser grind. For sure, that's a good point. Especially if it's a retired potter, maybe she's had this sitting around for, decades.
Yes, so, that'd be true.
Yeah, so that could, materials change, and there's different mines and different sides of a mine where where they're getting these materials from. So they can be variable for sure, because they just dig them out of the earth and grind them up and send them to us. So I see Richard is typing a comment about kiln loading. Kiln loading, what are the general rules for placement? Okay, so generally with kiln loading, for a bisque versus a glaze, there are different rules or guidelines, I guess. So for your posts and your shelves for glaze firing, I mean, are you asking how close your pots can be together, or like how much space that you want to have in between them? Oh, hi, Richard.
Hi.
Hey.
Hi. I'm
there he is.
One hand, sorry. So I have an electric kiln, and I loaded. I've fired it maybe 15 times, and I had the misfortune of putting a couple pieces close to the coils, and the sides of the pots, and even though it didn't overfire, and I was just wondering what precautions should I take for that to not happen.
So did the pots stick to the coils? Is that what you said?
No, it just that the sides of the pot next to the wall of the kiln kind of got bubbly.
Oh, okay.
I've thrown them out, so I don't have anything to show you. But
yeah, no, I have seen that before. I generally go with 1/2 inch, so I like to keep my pots at least 1/2 inch away. And we're packing some pretty full kilns, but at least 1/2 inch away from the thermocouples and the elements and the sides of the kiln. I like to keep the pots away from the bricks, the posts that are holding your kiln shelves as well. But yeah, 1/2 inch away from the elements for sure. And I mean, even more would be better, but I know that we often will come in, so about 1/2 inch.
Do you think the glaze could have been faulty? It was a store-bought glaze, and I was thinking, obviously the coils would be generating the most heat, right? And I would think, I just was so surprised that happened. I don't know.
And so was it just the pots that were really close to the coils where the glaze bubbled?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The side of the pot where so maybe it was too close.
Yeah, that happened in my last gas firing. I put a bowl right next to the flame, and it was really bubbly. Right, you know, you can see it's like just a flame mark. Yeah, not a good result because it bubbled and yeah.
All right. Well.
Yeah, so it could just be, I mean, because the glazes are used to just having this ambient temperature that is, you know, slowly increasing. So it could just be that intense heat at that one spot just caused the glaze to start bubbling. And then usually, like glaze, it's common for glazes to bubble during a firing, but then the bubbles kind of heal over and you don't really see an evidence of that after the firing. But that is something that happens, and so it could be that yeah, those parts, just that one spot of direct heat is causing yeah, the glaze to kind of boil like that.
Okay, so that makes sense. I'll be more careful in the future.
Yeah, and I would say like just the pattern that it was the pots that were the closest to the elements. Like I can't really explain exactly why that happened, but it seems like that's what would be the cause of that bubbling would be the proximity to the elements there. So
thank you.
You're welcome. Hopefully that's helpful.
I hopefully it'll be the last time.
Yeah, did that happen more than once, or was it just one firing?
Just once.
Just once, yeah.
So,
okay, so fingers crossed for the next one. Okay. I see Monique has a question. If a glaze has a specific gravity of 1.45, can you tell how much materials and water there is in the mix for 100 grams? Yeah, I don't, just because, I was saying this earlier, because different glaze recipes have different materials, and those solid materials have different densities, then different glaze recipes are going to require different amounts of water to come to the same specific gravity. And so the specific gravity is just the density of the liquid glaze. So there isn't really a standard, you know, you add this much water, this much dry material, and you're going to get this specific gravity result. What did I do? I made a glaze that had, I kept track, I was mixing a glaze and I kept track of, you know, how much water I was adding every time. So I started with 50% water. So I made 500 grams of a glaze recipe, and then I added 250 grams of water. So that's 50% of the dry weight that I added in water. And the specific gravity was 1.68. And then I wish I could remember right now, but I can't. And so then I added incrementally, I added water to bring the specific gravity down to 1.4. So the amount of water that I added, I kept track of. So I could, Monique, are you in my Facebook group? Because what I can do is I can go back and check my notes and just see, because I did this with 2 different glaze recipes where I kept track, and they're like completely different materials, where I kept track of the water. So I would love to go back and check to see at 1.45, like what the water versus solid materials were. So yeah, you say you are in my Facebook group. So if you want to ask this question in there, and then I'll go back and I'll look at my notes and I'll see if I can get you like a ballpark answer. But it may not be applicable to every single glaze recipe, but it could get you kind of close. So I'll look that up for you. Cool. Okay, I see a question. Lisa says, haven't been able to be here the whole time. Any general suggestions for how to figure out and test whether the glaze is a good fit to a certain clay body to prevent crazing over time? Anything in the glaze characteristics on Glazy that might give an indication? Yeah, so if you're looking at the UMF on Glazy, I mean, it's hard. The answer is no, that you can't really predict crazing because crazing is a relationship between a specific clay body and a specific glaze recipe. And so if your clay body changes, then the potential for the glaze to craze would change as well. And so the prediction isn't there, but there are some kind of like some parameters that you could look for that could indicate that the glaze has the potential to craze. And let me just look at Glazy. So on Glazy, there's the stall chart, which is this graph with a curve on it. And so the shaded area on the graph, it says that it represents crazing. Now that's just kind of a guideline. And so the stall graph is a graph that was created by Stahl. He was a scientist and he created this chart in 1912, I believe. And so he mapped out, he made a glaze recipe for all these points on the chart where each recipe has a different silica and alumina level. So, so he made, you know, like 50 different glaze recipes, and then he plotted where his glazes were crazed. And so this curve on the Stahl chart that shows crazing, that's the pattern that Stahl saw when he did all of these tests with his glazes and his clay body. And so that curve is kind of a pattern that's not, it doesn't translate to every clay body, but the pattern, like the curve itself, is kind of like that. If you're on one point of the graph, so say you're in the shaded area, the crazed region of the graph, to get out of the crazed region, you know, you go up and to the right on the graph, and that gets you out of the crazed region. And so the crazed region can move around, but the general shape of that curve stays the same. So one indication that your glaze could craze is if it has really, really low silica and alumina levels. And I would say like alumina of below 0.3 is quite low. And so that's one sort of indication, is if your alumina level is below 0.3, there's a good chance you're going to be in that crazed region on the Stahl graph, and that to adjust your glaze to get out of that crazing region, you want to increase your silica and alumina proportionately so that you keep your silica and alumina ratio the same, but you kind of move out of that crazing region. The other thing is that if you have really high sodium and potassium levels, so if your flux ratio is you know, 0.3 to 0.7, they say that that is like the ideal ratio for durability. But what I found that, because I've done all these tests where I mapped out the Stahl chart, where I did like 50 different glaze tests. And so I found that when my flux ratio was 0.3 to 0.7, and that means that I have proportionately more primary flux, so more sodium, I was using sodium, than calcium. So when I had more sodium, less calcium, I had more crazed test tiles. Then when I increased the calcium and brought the sodium down, then the amount of tiles that were crazed was much less. And so if you have high amounts of sodium and potassium, so your flux ratio is above 0.3 to 0.7, so say you have 0.4 to 0.6, that could indicate that there's a likelihood of your glaze crazing. So these are just like the things that I've noticed in the tests that I've done, where, you know, the same point on the graph at 0.3 to 0.7 is crazed, but at 0.2 to 0.8 is not crazed. So those are the things that I have found. crazing. Sorry if that was really advanced for some of you, but you can just absorb the information. One day it'll all start to make sense. So hopefully that helps with Lisa's question. But really the only way to know for sure if your glaze is going to craze is through testing, and then the ways to kind of, if your glaze is crazing, the ways to reduce crazing or prevent crazing are to either increase your silica and alumina levels while keeping the ratio the same, or to decrease your primary flux, your sodium and potassium, and then increase your secondary flux. So that's my stall crazing talk. And I did write, I did a talk at NCECA in Pittsburgh in 2018 about cone 6 glazes and all the research that I was doing, where I mapped out the stall chart. And so I have I wrote a paper, and there's also a YouTube video of my talk. So if you wanted to watch or read that, I'm just gonna post the link in the chat here, because that has, oh, here it is. Because that kind of explains what I was just saying here about crazing. And so I give explanations for my findings with crazing and the flux ratio and everything. So, okay, Ben says a rule of thumb I've heard is that you put your pot into boiling water, let it cool rapidly, and then you'll get an idea how much it, or if it will craze or not. Yeah, so the hot and cold test. So you can stick it in the freezer and then add boiling water, or you can, someone said recently that they put it in the oven and then add cold water. So that hot and cold, that's gonna kind of force crazing if it's gonna happen. So that's a good way to test your pots. Because yeah, crazing doesn't always happen right away. Sometimes crazing happens even years down the road. So if you can just stress your glazes out with this hot and cool so that the glaze expands and then contracts, and then that's going to help you see whether the glaze is likely to craze. Okay, Richard, can you talk about your course on Mastering Glaze Consistency? Yeah, did you have a specific question? So just for if you guys were late showing up, I just announced that my course, Mastering Glaze Consistency, registration opened yesterday. And it's an online course, so I'm just gonna post the link to that again in the chat, just in case you wanna read more about it. But yeah, Richard, hi, did you have?
I guess I came in late, so
okay.
I'll just read the, I'll read your email or whatever it is.
Okay, so I just posted in the chat the link to the info page on the course.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's really long and detailed, so hopefully.
How long is it for?
The course itself, so it officially starts on the 27th of April. So when you sign up, if you sign up now, you get access to module 1 right away. And then module 2 is released on April 27th. And then you get a module every 3 days up until May 12th, when you get the module 7, and that's the last module. So yeah, so that's about how long. And then you have lifetime access to all of that content once it's all out there.
Oh, great. Okay, so are there assignments that we'll be having to fire at home and that kind of thing, or?
Yeah, there's suggested assignments. You don't have to complete the assignments to get through the course, but they're highly recommended for you to kind of integrate what you're learning. And so part of the course is like to figure out what the ideal specific gravity is for each of your glazes. And so you're going to do, like I was saying earlier, where I take a glaze and then I mix it with minimal water content, which means the specific gravity would be on the high side. and I'll dip a test tile, and then I'll add a little bit of water, and I'll gradually decrease the specific gravity, dipping a test tile as I go. And then you're gonna get this wide range of results from one different glaze, and you can kind of you can see like, oh, well, these are definitely too thin over here. The glaze is running when the specific gravity is too high. And so you kind of fine tune like where the ideal specific gravity is going to be for your glaze. So there's all these, testing and experiments that are laid out in the course. And so it's great if you do have access to a studio where you can do them, but you can always do them. A lot of people have messaged me saying that their studio's closed right now, and or they're busy and they can't do the homework. And so that's fine. You can do it at any point. You can go back and take the course again and do the assignments, and they're just going to help you learn more. But I've done all the assignments in the course, so I share my results so you can kind of figure out like what I mean by all of these tests. And
thank you. Okay,
yeah,
great.
You're welcome. Okay, so we are at, it's 6 p.m. my time. I'm sure it's really late for some of you, and then it's early for the rest of you. So you guys are in Australia, you're just getting started with your day, and I'm just about at dinner time. So it was really nice to chat with you all again. And meet some of you for the first time today. So thank you for coming. And I'll be doing another Glaze Chat. Unfortunately for the Australians, it's going to be at 9 a.m. next Friday. So it's just a time.
That's okay.
It's just a time that works better for me, but and this will be the last Glaze Chat, because then I'm starting with my course. We're doing a Glaze Chat every Friday with my students, so I won't be able to do these free Glaze Chats for everyone for at least a month. So if you can, come next Friday, and if not, if you want to sign up for my class, and then we can continue that way. But yeah, I really enjoy these, and I'm sure I will resume again in the future. So thank you, everyone, and I hope you have a good weekend. It was really nice chatting with you. I learned a lot of things today, which Wendy's, cheers, Wendy, with her wine glass. I learned a lot of things today from all of you, so I appreciate that, and I love these, just getting together and seeing all your faces, because I haven't really left my house much in the past month, as I'm sure a lot of you haven't either. So yeah, I feel like this is like my social event of the week. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Bye.
And we'll see you next time.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, Sue.